Terror in the south of France, 84 dead in Nice as a lorry ploughs into crowds. Thousands were celebrating French National Day when the driver deliberately mowed them down.
There were people, children who were by themselves, bodies along the promenade. Apparently there was a woman next to us who had received a bullet in the shoulder.
The driver, a 31-year-old French Tunisian, was shot dead by police. So who is he and what is known about him? Flags at half-mast in Downing Street as Britain's new Prime Minister condemns the attack.
If, as we fear, this was a terrorist attack, then we must redouble our efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life.
And tributes from across the world to remember those who lost their lives. I'm live in Nice this lunchtime with the very latest on this developing story.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Mark Austin.
Good afternoon from Nice in France, a country once again suffering the most appalling terror attack. 84 people are dead and dozens more are injured after a lorry drove into crowds celebrating the French National Day, Bastille Day. Many of the victims are believed to have been children. This is what we know so far this lunchtime. Just after 10:30 here last night, a lorry weighing 25 tons mounted the curb on the packed Promenade des Anglais. It travelled down the road for over a mile, ploughing into crowds at a speed of up to 30 miles an hour. Police finally managed to stop the lorry near the Palais de Méditerranée Hotel. It's believed the driver then opened fire on people in the crowd before he was eventually shot dead by police. Now, the driver has been identified as a 31-year-old French Tunisian who was known to the police for petty crime and violence. On this programme, the full story and all the reaction. But first, Dan Rivers now on Nice's Night of Terror.
On one of France's most glamorous roads, a night of unbelievable carnage. This white truck used as a lethal weapon. At this point, the terrorist at its wheel had already mowed down dozens of people. As it continued, you can see the crowds in its path, and the truck apparently hitting something else, possibly more victims. On closer inspection, this footage shows the frantic attempt of one brave man on a scooter to stop the lorry. He falls off his bike, but then gets up and runs alongside. As police officers take aim, the man's efforts, though, are in vain, and the truck ploughs on. Eventually, the driver was halted by French police in the only way they could. His rampage had been brought to a halt by one brave man who climbed onto the cab of the lorry, the police moving cautiously as they check the terrorist is dead. He'd fired several shots at them but had missed. Inside, the police found guns and grenades. The driver, named as 31-year-old Mohamed Louaïej Boulel, had rented the vehicle 2 days earlier. The man who took this video fleeing along the beach with hundreds of others. Bastille Day in Nice turned into a night of terror. The Promenade des Anglais had been packed for France's annual celebration. The truck had smashed right through these crowds just minutes earlier. Terrified, people were fleeing for their lives. Among the crowds and casualties, many children. Once again, France has been indiscriminately hit by those who seek to kill and strike at the very foundations of French society. Among the survivors, these women who'd been at a rock gig on the seafront.
J'ai entendu les coups de feu.
I heard the gunshots and that's when I saw the bodies on the ground. That's actually when I understood what had happened. When you ask me how I feel, I don't know what I feel, I can't qualify it, I don't know.
There were people, children who were by themselves, bodies along the promenade. I don't remember anymore, but I heard my best friend. I've blocked it out. Apparently there was a woman next to us who had received a bullet to her shoulder and who was covered in blood.
Details about some of those killed have started to emerge. 51-year-old Sean Copeland was on holiday from Texas with his 11-year-old son Brody. 54-year-old Swiss national Linda Casanova was confirmed by her brother as being among the dead. A French woman, Fatima Charihi, was with her sons when she was killed. Originally from Morocco, her son described her as a Muslim who practiced a real Islam that was not practiced by the terrorists. And 21-year-old Victoria Savchenko was a student from the elite financial university in Moscow. She was walking along the promenade when she was struck by the truck and was killed instantly. Overnight, the French president addressed a nation reeling from its third major attack in 18 months.
France is afflicted by this new tragedy. It is horrified by what has occurred. This monstrousness, which consists of using a truck to kill, deliberately kill, dozens of people who simply came to celebrate Bastille Day.
He arrived in Nice this morning, visiting a crisis centre and then on to the hospital to meet the injured. Nice, France, the world, today digesting the awful scale of this attack. The residents of this city left to reflect on the new twisted tactics used by the terrorists to such deadly effect, where families have been enjoying a night out. Dan Rivers, ITV News.
Well, I'm joined now by two people who got caught up in last night's terrible events. Ben Terry here, an Australian living in Dublin, working as a television producer, and Zoe Tisdale from Northern Ireland. Ben, if I can start with you, just tell me what you saw and what you heard last night.
Mark, it was really a scene of chaos and mass panic that I've certainly never experienced before. We were celebrating, as were so many people here, the Bastille Day, watching the fireworks, and shortly after that finished, we realised something was terribly wrong. We started to see people running towards us, at first a few and then a lot more, and at that point we thought, okay, instinct kicks in, you just have to follow suit, you have to get out of there. Almost instantly then we heard gunfire, and it was at that moment that you couldn't help but think this has to be terror related. It was really frightening.
So you knew then that it was something that certainly sinister.
You'd like to think that it wouldn't be, and that perhaps it was just somebody letting off a cracker or a stray firework or something like that. But in the aftermath of the attacks that we saw in Paris in November, you can't help but think that that's what it is, and that the terror and just looking at people's expressions, you could see that something awful had happened.
And when you came out and you saw what had happened, what were your thoughts then?
To be honest with you, we sought refuge in a restaurant. We ran in through the kitchen and hid inside a storeroom there with about 15 other people. As we were in there, more people came in. They were incredibly distressed. They were trying to call family members who they'd been separated from during the panic. The worst thing for us was just uncertainty, because we had no idea at that point what was actually happening. When we came out, it was actually a sense of subdued panic, I'd call it, in the sense that we had no idea what had happened. We were told to avoid this main strip here and go back home via the back streets.
All right, well, thanks very much. Zoe, now over to you. What happened to you last night?
So basically, yeah, we were just having a family night. We had just had dinner in a restaurant just a few streets back, and we wandered down onto the beach to watch the fireworks with thousands of other people. The children were excited. We sat on the beach just not far from here, watched the fireworks, and then just the fireworks finished and we were just about to make our way back up onto the promenade, crossed over the road, and then all of a sudden we heard shots being fired, just pandemonium really. Everybody just started running, shouting, screaming. Obviously I have two young children, they began to panic, and really we just all gathered them up and we just had to run, and we followed the crowd. We had to run completely the opposite direction of where we needed to be. Our apartment is just, not far away, but
did you see the injured and the dying around you at that stage?
No, not at that stage. We really didn't know what happened. We heard the shots, and obviously seeing everybody running, shouting, people were crying. We thought, this isn't good. Something tragic has happened. So we just wanted to get safe, get far away from here as possible. Got back to the apartment, and it wasn't actually until we were in there and we saw the reports on social media what had happened, and it was disbelief. The kids were in shock. We were all shocked what could have happened, that we were in in the centre of that, really.
Absolutely appalling. And Ben, now you have had a little bit of time to reflect. What are your thoughts on what you witnessed last night?
To be honest with you, it still feels surreal. I can't believe that it happened. I mean, as a journalist myself, obviously involved in coverage of the likes of the attacks we saw in Paris and in Brussels, but then to witness that terror and that fear firsthand, it's something that nobody, I think, can really understand unless they've experienced it. I guess I'm still in a little bit of shock today, and my heart goes out to the French people having to endure another attack after a really short amount of time after the Paris attacks.
Well, thank you very much indeed to both of you. It's an appalling thing to have gone through, so thank you very much for coming to see us today. Thank you very much indeed. Well, now, back in Britain, Theresa May has been talking about these terror attacks. The new Prime Minister called the attack horrifying. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, said the attack presented what he called a continuing threat to Europe. Our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks, is outside the Foreign Office this lunchtime. And Romilly, strong reaction then from Britain.
Yes, Mark, it's obviously not a statement that the Prime Minister would have hoped to have had to make, let alone in her first week. But the Prime Minister does have her wealth of experience as Home Secretary to draw on. What she wanted to do today was to show solidarity with the French and also to reassure people back here. This is what she had to say.
I will speak to President Hollande today and make clear that the United Kingdom stands shoulder to shoulder with France today, as we have done so often in the past. If, as we fear, this was a terrorist attack, then we must redouble our efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life.
This morning, the Union Jack and the French tricolour are flying at half-mast over Downing Street. A meeting of the Emergency Committee, Cobra, has broken up a short while ago. That involved officials from the Foreign Office here, from the Home Office, embassy staff and also representatives of the Met Police. The French have been offered British police assistance. And just to update you on the number of British nationals feared involved, we're told now that a small number are feared to have been injured. A total of 12 consular staff, including the British ambassador, are either en route or already in Nice. A crisis centre has been set up, and the new Foreign Secretary has said this morning that we stand shoulder to shoulder with France.
Clearly, this represents a continuing threat. If this is a terrorist incident, as it appears to be, this represents a continuing threat to us in the whole of Europe, and we must meet it together.
And on the security situation here, the threat level here remains severe. That hasn't changed. It doesn't mean an attack is seen as highly likely, but police are being asked to review security at large events. The Prime Minister's spokesman has said this morning that in the light of what's happened, that's just seen as the prudent and sensible thing to do.
Romilly, thank you very much indeed for that. And we have a quote from Theresa May. She says the government will redouble its efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has ordered a security review across the UK capital. For the French, of course, it is the third terrible terrorist attack in 18 months. Charlie Hebdo, of course, and then the Paris attacks, and now this. Paul Davis reports on the continuing threat of terror in France.
Riddled with bullet holes, the vehicle that became a weapon of a twisted ideology. Today, a stunned France is once again asking why, how, and who could do this. The driver has been named locally as Mohamed Boulel. He was 31 and of Tunisian descent, but had lived for many years in Nice. His identity papers were found near his body. If attacking the French way of life and creating terror was his aim, this murderous act was dreadfully effective. And it led to an equally dreadful admission from the French Prime Minister. Unfortunately, we can expect more events like this in the future, he said. With more innocent victims, we must live with this war the terrorists are waging on us. With attacks on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and the massacre in Paris, France finds itself on the front line. Experts say the country's military role in Iraq and Syria and a growing number of radicalised young Muslims within its population make it vulnerable.
There are huge concerns around isolated, marginalised, disenfranchised young men who are falling out the bottom of society with limited hope and limited opportunities. And so the anger and frustration naturally translates itself into taking some kind of revenge acts against the state.
Police forces across Britain are now reviewing their own security in light of the Nice attack, particularly at major events that could be a symbolic target.
Whilst our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Nice and the people in France who've suffered horrific acts over the last couple of years, we've got to make sure that we do all we can to keep our citizens safe.
One of the biggest challenges, as it seems security forces in France have discovered to their cost, is predicting a lone wolf attack from someone with no previous record of extremist activity. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Well, I'm joined now by our security editor, Rohit Kachru. And Rohit, another appalling attack then in France. Why do they keep being targeted like this?
Well, that's certainly a question that's being asked in every town, every city right across this country. I think there are a couple of crucial reasons. Firstly, France's forthright role in the fight against not only so-called Islamic State, but the work that it's been doing over the last several years in northern and western Africa against jihadist groups there. But I think this probably goes much wider than that, and I think there is a growing realisation of that here in France. There is a social context to this. A few weeks ago, the Prime Minister here talked about there being an apartheid of separation between Muslim and non-Muslim communities who in this country, perhaps much more so than in the UK, are increasingly siloed. And it's difficult to separate that social context from the behaviour that we see last night. This is more than the acts of individuals. There is a social backdrop to this.
But also there is a desperation about attacks like this, and increasingly that is the case.
Increasingly, we've seen 7 terrorist attacks in this country over the last 18 months, and they have become more and more desperate. How do you prevent it? Well, perhaps barriers along the roads here, and I'm sure that we'll see schemes like that being rolled out in this city and right across this country. But of course, the root causes of this don't go to one person, but there's a much wider social context to all of this.
All right, Rohit, for now, thank you very much indeed. And of course, world leaders have been condemning this attack and mourning the victims. President Obama has called the atrocity horrific. Germany's Angela Merkel expressed her disgust and her disbelief and said Germany would stand at France's side. Across the world, there are vigils, there are moments of silence to remember those killed, as Sejal Carrier now reports.
Despite the shock, despite the sadness, the people of Nice are coming together to offer help in every which way they can. This is the queue for donating blood, around 400 strong. In London, people have been leaving flowers and candles outside the French embassy. Many gathered in Sydney, where they lit candles too, while the French and Australian flags were flown side by side on Sydney Harbour Bridge. And in Russia, a makeshift memorial to the many French victims.
With 1 minute silence.
At a meeting of Asian and European leaders in Mongolia, there was a minute's silence and condemnation of the attack.
It's a tragic paradox that the subject of this attack were people celebrating liberty, equality and fraternity.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel said Germany stands by France in the fight against terrorism, adding, "We will win this fight." And in a statement, President Obama said, "On behalf of the American people, I condemn in the strongest terms what appears to be a horrific terrorist attack." While across the world, people took to social media to show solidarity with France, among them the 2 US presidential hopefuls. Hillary Clinton tweeted, "Every American stands in strong solidarity with the people of France." And Donald Trump said, "My prayers and condolences to the victims and families of the terrible tragedy in Nice. We are with you in every way." Once again, the world is showing France she is not alone. Sejal Carrier, ITV News.
Right, just to recap this developing story this lunchtime. 84 people, at least 84 people, are now known to have died in this terrible terrorist attack. Many others, dozens more, are injured. Several of those are believed to be children, and a small number of Britons are also thought to have been involved. I'm joined just finally once again by Rohit Kachru, our security editor. So we're looking at a lone wolf here, are we, do you think?
Too early to say. There are some signs of that. What we do know is that several hours after this, there is no claim of responsibility from any terrorist group. We've been looking at the social media channels used ordinarily by so-called Islamic State. We've been looking at their semi-official news agencies, and none of them have made any comment, official comment about what happened here last night. It may be a lone wolf, although you know, the people that we call lone wolves are never really acting in isolation, and I'm sure that's going to become much clearer over the next few hours.
All right, and how worried will the security services around the West be when they see this type of attack?
Incredibly worried, and I think part of it, as you note, Mark, is the desperation of this. This has been 18 months during which terrorism has really come to this continent. This was always a foreign problem, but in the last year and a half, European countries, not just one, but also Belgium and also elsewhere, have been dealing with this issue so many times, and they will all be incredibly worried about what we saw here last night.
Okay, Rohit, thank you very much indeed. And that is just about it this lunchtime. At least 84 people, as I say, are now known to have died. Keep up with all the details on our website, and I'll be back with the evening news at 6:30. Julie Etchinger will be here at 10. But for now, from all of us here, bye-bye.